Throughout the Northwest Europe campaign from June 1944 to May 1945, American intelligence officers talked to thousands of captured German soldiers, and these long talks made huge reports that are now kept in the National Archives. And the reports showed the same clear pattern again and again, because when the German soldiers were asked what weapon scared them the most, they almost always said American artillery. And they did not say American tanks, and they did not say American airplanes. They just said artillery. And this fear showed up not only in their words, but also in how they acted in battle. Because German units made careful plans to stay away from American artillery eyes, so they moved mostly at night when the small planes could not see them. And they spread out their groups so they did not look like one big target. And they used their own guns for only a short time before quickly moving again. And German soldiers even learned the special sound of the American L-4 Cub plane, the small plane used to help American artillery. And when that little Cub showed up, the German soldiers knew they had about 3 minutes before the shells landed. And these shells were not random because they were tight and accurate and hit right on the German positions. And the timing was so steady, the German company leaders used stopwatches to count the time between seeing the Cub and feeling the first rounds land. And the usual time was 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And this fast speed surprised German artillery officers, who knew how hard it was to figure out the numbers for the guns, because in the German system, a gun group needed 12 to 15 minutes to find the right elevation, the right aim, and the right charge. And this slow work made them feel stressed even more by the fast American system that kept pushing them constantly. The calculations for artillery involved range tables, protractors, and slide rules, and every single thing from wind speed to barrel wear had to be figured out one by one. And under battle conditions, with incomplete weather info or broken communications, it could take 20 minutes or more to finish. And the idea that Americans could get coordinates, figure out firing data for many batteries at once, coordinate them to hit together, and fire in 3 minutes seemed impossible. But they did it all the time. And the secret was an invention made at the United States Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, during the years between World War I and World War II. This invention was called the Fire Direction Center, and it came from careful study of World War I artillery, because American artillery officers saw that artillery was the weapon that caused more deaths than any other weapon. But they also saw it was really inefficient, because using tons of ammunition got small results. And the problem was not the guns, which worked okay. The problem was controlling the fire and making the guns work together. In World War I, each battery mostly worked alone, with its own commander figuring out its own firing numbers, and getting many batteries to hit one target needed long planning and rarely worked. Major Carlos Brewer, who was director of the gunnery department at Fort Sill from 1929 to 1933, started making solutions, and he made firing charts that made it easier to see targets and helped batteries work together, because instead of figuring everything from zero, they could put their spot and the target spot on a standard chart with reference marks. The chart made it easier to understand positions and share firing info. Brewer also made new survey ways that let batteries know exactly where they were, cutting one big aiming mistake. But he could not fix the hard part, which was figuring out the numbers for the guns. Even with charts and surveys, it still took a long time. Then Brewer's replacement, Major Orlando Ward, who was director from 1932 to 1934, made the big change by putting all the firing control in one place at the battalion level. So instead of each battery figuring out its own numbers, the Battalion Fire Direction Center handled all the guns at the same time. The center got requests from forward observers, calculated the firing numbers, and sent them to all batteries. And this allowed many batteries to hit the same target fast and switch quickly to new targets as needed. And this system was shown publicly in spring 1931 when the gunnery department successfully made a battalion fire together using the centralized fire direction, proving that multiple batteries could fire together accurately at one target without long delays. The demonstration amazed the visiting officers and proved the idea worked. And over the next 10 years, the fire direction center methods were made better and the rules were standardized. And by the time the United States joined World War II, battalion fire direction centers were set up all over the field artillery branch. But the system still needed hard calculations, and fire direction officers spent years learning to use big firing tables, huge books that showed firing numbers for thousands of combinations of distance, weather, and shell types. And finding the right numbers in the books took a lot of time, and working between numbers needed math skills. And the system worked, but it was slow until the big breakthrough came in November 1940, when Captain Abbott Harrington Burns at Fort Sill made the graphical firing table. And Burns worked all night to make a device that solved what he called the slow torture of hard math. And the graphical firing table was like a special slide rule on a clear sheet that could be put over the firing chart. And by lining it up with the battery and target spots, the officers could read firing numbers right away, without doing math. And the device made calculations more than 20 times faster. And even regular soldiers with only basic math could do what used to need trained officers. And this new tool changed American artillery forever. And by 1942, when Americans fought in North Africa, every artillery battalion had fire direction centers with graphical firing tables. And the mix of central control and fast calculation made the 3-minute firing time that shocked the Germans. So an observer could call in target coordinates, the fire direction center could calculate and send out firing numbers, and many batteries could be shooting in 3 minutes, and no other army in World War II could do that fast. And the system let Americans do what they called time-on-target missions, where guns from many batteries over several kilometers fired at different times, but all shells hit the target at the exact same moment, in a 3-second window. And the result was terrible, because instead of shells coming one after another, giving soldiers a chance to hide, all rounds hit at once, so the whole bombardment happened instantly before anyone could react. And most deaths in artillery attacks happen in the first few seconds before troops can go down or find cover. And the time-on-target missions made the most casualties by packing all fire into those first critical seconds. And German artillery could not do time-on-target attacks on surprise targets, because their battery-level system was too spread out and could not coordinate that fast. The Germans could fire all their guns if they had days to get ready, carefully checking positions and figuring out all the firing numbers ahead of time, but they couldn't do it in 3 minutes against a target that popped up suddenly. And British artillery was better than German, with great training and equipment. And British officers made detailed fire plans that let them hit a target with lots of guns. And by 1941, Brigadier Jack Parham showed he could control 144 guns in a divisional attack, hitting within 5 minutes of the fire order. And British artillery used a system of standard targets they called Mike, Uncle, Victor, and William, with each name meaning a different size of massed fire. But British methods were not the same as American time-on-target, because British fire could hit fast, but not all at the exact same second like Americans did. And British doctrine let shells arrive over a short time, while Americans wanted all shells in 3 seconds. And that difference was small, but it mattered a lot for how many soldiers got hurt. And Russian artillery worked in a totally different way, because the Red Army had huge numbers of guns and used them for long, big bombardments that went on for hours and used massive amounts of shells. And at Kursk, in July 1943, Soviet artillery fired over 1.6 million shells in the first attack. And the fire was really deadly and broke German attacks, but Russian fire control stayed simple and basic. Their batteries usually shot at area targets or pre-planned spots without fine adjustment like American artillery. And Russian shells often fell all over,
hundreds of meters, and sometimes even hit their own troops. And Soviet thinking was about overwhelming with lots of fire, not precision. And this worked for the big battles on the Eastern Front, where targets were big groups of soldiers or vehicles, but it could not match American flexibility and precision. And the American way of using artillery focused on being fast and flexible, and this worked because of a big forward observer system that no other army had. And American rules put trained artillery observers at the company level and lower in infantry and tank units. And these observers could call in fire directly to battalion fire direction centers on any target they saw. And the observers were not just people pointing out targets, they were trained officers, or NCOs, who knew fire control rules and could work with fire direction centers to adjust fire and make it hit better. And each American artillery battalion had a liaison section that gave forward observers to the units they supported. For a battalion helping an infantry regiment, liaison officers were usually sent to each infantry battalion, and extra observers went down to company level when needed. And the observers carried strong radios that kept good contact with fire direction centers even in rough land or in battle. And the SCR 610 radio, which became standard for forward observers in 1943, could reach about 20 miles and worked well enough that observers could stay in touch even if their infantry units were cut off or surrounded. And forward observers were trained to find targets carefully, using maps and by looking, and they carried plotting boards, compasses, and binoculars. And a trained observer could guess the distance to a target within 50 meters up to 2,000 meters, which was close enough for the Fire Direction Center to figure out good firing numbers. And observers also learned adjustment methods to call corrections to walk artillery fire onto targets that were missed at first. And the usual adjustment method used the clock system to show where the target was compared to the last shells. So an observer might say, target is at 12 o'clock, 200 meters from the last impact, and the Fire Direction Center would change fire. And the big change in forward observation came with the L-4 Cub plane, which was a military version of the Piper J-3 Cub, a small commercial plane. And the military Cub had bigger tires to land on rough fields, a clear window on top to see up, and radios to talk with ground units. And it had a 65-horsepower engine and could fly up to 85 miles per hour and could take off and land in less than 300 feet, so it could operate from forward airstrips near the front lines. And the Army Air Forces first did not want artillery planes, saying all planes should be Air Force, but artillery officers argued they needed observers who knew artillery and were part of artillery command. And after lots of arguing, the War Department said yes in 1942. And each artillery battalion got 2 L-4 planes and pilots who were artillery officers, and the L-4s changed artillery a lot. Because from 1,000 to 1,500 feet up, the observer could see for miles and see things ground observers could not see, like troops behind hills, hidden artillery, or supply convoys moving behind enemy lines. And the observer could find targets, guess coordinates using maps and references, and call in fire to the Fire Direction Center. And more than 5,400 L-4 planes were made during the war, with over 2,700 serving in field artillery in Europe. And having an L-4 overhead became a sign that American artillery was active, and German soldiers learned to hear the small Cub engine and hide fast when they heard it. German tactical manuals from late 1944 had exact instructions for what to do when L-4 planes showed up, and units were told to stop moving, spread out as much as possible, and hide, because the Germans knew that once the Cub spotted them, artillery shells would land in minutes. And Germans tried to shoot down the L-4s, usually failed because the small planes flew low and slow, making them hard targets for anti-aircraft guns made for fast fighters in high planes. And the L-4s were nimble enough that pilots could see the fire and dodge it. And German fighters could catch them, but patrolling forward was dangerous because of American air power. And German fighters trying to stop Cubs often got attacked by American escorts. And many L-4 pilots finished their whole tours without being shot down, even though they flew over enemy areas all the time. And the L-4 pilots worked very closely with the fire direction centers they supported. And a battalion aerial observer might fly every day with the same fire direction officer, and they made fast communication rules so the observer could describe targets quickly in shorthand, and the officer would understand immediately. And the speed and accuracy of this teamwork was amazing, because a skilled aerial observer team could find a target, call for fire, and have shells landing in 2 to 3 minutes, and then adjust fire if needed, often hitting very small targets like single vehicles or one artillery piece. And the effect on German soldiers was huge, because having American planes overhead all the time meant Germans could never feel safe even in back areas, and supply trucks had to move at night or risk being seen and destroyed, and artillery had to hide during the day, and reserve units could not gather in clear spots. And the L4s forced Germans to always watch and limited what they could do in daylight. And combining the aerial observers with the Fire Direction Center gave Americans battlefield awareness like never before. And the Fire Direction Centers kept detailed maps showing friendly units, enemy units, possible enemy units, and areas where no fire should happen. And when the observer spotted a target, the center could quickly decide if it was safe to fire, which batteries could reach it, and how many shells were needed. And the whole process from spotting to shells landing could be done in less than 3 minutes for urgent targets. And this flexibility was amazing because German rules gave specific batteries to support specific units, and a German infantry battalion had one assigned artillery battery to fire for them. And if the battalion needed more fire than one battery could give, they had to go through higher headquarters, which took a long time. The process for Germans to get extra fire was slow, but American forward observers could call fire from any battery in range, and the Fire Direction Center could bring together fire from all the artillery in a corps if the target needed it. And General Omar Bradley, who led the 12th Army Group, wrote after the war that the Fire Direction Center system let them make huge concentrations of fire. And during the Battle of the Bulge, the artillery on the northern side of the German attack controlled fire from 348 guns from different divisions and corps spread across many kilometers, all managed through coordinated fire direction centers that could mass their fire on key targets in minutes. And American artillery worked very well, as shown in many battles. And at the Battle of Mortain in early August 1944, German forces launched Operation Liedisch, a desperate counterattack trying to cut off American forces that had broken out of Normandy. And the attack started before dawn on August 7th, with German tanks and infantry moving fast in the dark when American planes could not attack. And German commanders wanted to reach Avranches on the coast and cut off General George Patton's Third Army that had moved into Brittany. And at first the German attack made progress against surprised American units, but when daylight came, American artillery observers in L4 Cubs went up and started directing terrible fire onto the German columns. And the 230th Field Artillery Battalion, helping the 30th Infantry Division, fired thousands of rounds all day, and individual batteries fired so much that gun barrels got too hot and had to cool down, and ammunition ran low, and resupply trucks moved constantly between dumps and gun positions. And the fire was so precise and strong that German tank leaders said they could not move because whenever German tanks tried to advance or move, artillery shells hit their spots in minutes. And the combination of American artillery and fighter bomber attacks, all directed by aerial observers who could see everything, stopped the German attack completely. And by August 8th, it was clear the attack had failed. And by August 10th, the Germans were retreating. And what was supposed to be a big counterattack became a disaster because Allied forces surrounded and destroyed much of the German 7th Army. And Lieutenant Ralph Curley, commander of E Company, 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division, called artillery on his own position when Germans attacked Hill 314 near Mortain. And when the German 17th Panzer Grenadier Division attacked E Company just after 8 in the evening on August 7th, Curley called for artillery fire very close to his own spot. And 84 howitzers fired a 5-minute barrage that crushed the German attack. And American soldiers tried to hide from the friendly fire, while German soldiers could not handle it and ran away. And Curley's choice to take artillery fire on his own position showed how desperate the fighting was and how much American troops trusted their artillery system to be precise. And the battle for Hill 192 near San Lo in July 1944 also showed the same power of American artillery power. Because Hill 192 was a very important hill that controlled the paths to San Lo. And the Germans had built strong defenses with trenches, bunkers, and well-placed guns. And American troops had tried to take the hill many times in late June and early July with only small success, because the Germans could fire on them from far away. And the 2nd Infantry Division, which had to capture the hill, planned a careful attack supported by huge artillery fire. And Division Artillery had 3 battalions of 105mm howitzers
and 1 battalion of 155mm howitzers,
a total of 48 guns, but the Fire Direction Center could call in more support from Corps artillery, making over 100 guns ready to fire. And the attack started on July 11, 1944, after several days of preparation, and American artillery fired 20 time-on-target missions during the night of July 10 to 11, with dozens of guns hitting the German positions each mission, and the timing kept the Germans from resting or reorganizing. And every hour or two, another big bombardment hit them, keeping constant pressure. And on July 11, the main attack started with huge artillery fire, and the 2nd Infantry Division fired 20,000 rounds that day, more than 800 rounds per gun. And the Germans said the shelling completely messed up their command because telephone lines were cut, runners could not move, and commanders lost contact with their units. And when American infantry moved in after the artillery, the Germans were confused and weak. And Hill 192 was taken by early afternoon on July 11. And the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 to January 1945 showed American artillery power again, because when the Germans surprised the Americans on December 16, they made big early gains, but American artillery recovered in hours and started coordinated fire all along the front. And on the northern side, near Elsenborn Ridge, American artillery stopped the German attacks because the 1st Infantry Division and other units had massed artillery from divisional artillery, corps artillery, and even guns from nearby sectors that could reach the area. And the Fire Direction Centers controlled 348 guns from multiple divisions and corps. And this huge concentration was only possible because of the American system. And no other army could organize such fast, massive fire. And German infantry and tanks attacking Elsenborn Ridge were hit by devastating artillery that stopped every attack. And German commanders said the American artillery was so strong and accurate that their troops could not keep moving. And any unit that tried to advance was hit by time-on-target missions with no warning, and units trying to regroup in assembly spots were under fire within minutes. The mix of accurate fire and very fast response made it impossible for Germans to attack successfully, because the 6th Panzer Army, the main German force in the northern part, was almost completely stopped by American artillery. And German tank losses were so high that some panzer divisions lost more than half their tanks. And the German official history written after the war said the northern attack failed mainly because of American artillery, not American tanks or planes. And in the south, at Bastogne, American artillery was just as important, because the 101st Airborne Division, trapped in Bastogne, was supported by artillery inside the pocket and from guns outside. And forward observers with the paratroopers called for fire all the time, and fire direction centers coordinated any guns that could reach the needed areas. And German troops attacking Bastogne were hit by accurate, massed fire that came fast. And German commanders said they could not concentrate forces because American artillery would immediately fire on them. And German attempts to fire back were useless as the campaign went on, because American artillery had smart counter-battery methods, using lots of intelligence sources with sound-ranging units that triangulated enemy guns, microphones that listened for shots, flash-spotting posts that plotted muzzle flashes at night, planes and L-4 Cubs and fighter bombers reporting artillery, and prisoner interrogations giving locations. And all of this info went into fire direction centers that kept maps of known and suspected German guns. And when German guns fired, American systems detected them in seconds, and the coordinates went immediately to counter-battery centers. And American rules said to fire on any enemy guns right away. And German batteries firing more than a few rounds could expect American fire in 3 to 5 minutes. And this steadily reduced German artillery effectiveness. And German guns that showed their spots by firing were suppressed or destroyed. And German officers learned to fire short missions and move quickly, hoping to escape. But moving took time, especially for horse-drawn guns, which were most of their artillery. And many batteries were caught and destroyed while moving, and others survived only by firing very little, maybe a few rounds a day, and only in desperate situations. And the ammo problem made things worse, because by mid-1944, Allied planes and bombs had hit German logistics hard. Trucks and railroads were constantly attacked, and ammo production was down because bombing damaged factories and blocked raw materials. And German artillery in Normandy had strict ammo limits. And the Army Historical Foundation says the German 5th Panzer Army could fire only about 10% of the ammo that British artillery fired in the same area. The difference was not because Germans had fewer guns, but because they did not have enough ammunition. And German mobility was worse and got worse as the war went on, while American artillery was fully motorized from the start of U.S. involvement in the war, and every gun was culled by a truck or mounted on a self-propelled chassis. And the standard truck for the 105mm M2 was the 2.5-ton 6x6 called the Deuce and a Half, which could tow the gun at 40 miles per hour on roads and cross rough land that horses could not. And heavier guns needed stronger vehicles, like the 155mm M1 howitzer, which was usually pulled by the M5 high-speed tractor, a tracked vehicle made for towing artillery that could move the big gun across almost any land and tow at 35 miles per hour on roads. And the heaviest guns, like the 155mm M1917 Long Tom and the 8-inch howitzer, used the M4 high-speed tractor, an even stronger tracked vehicle. And American self-propelled artillery was even more mobile, like the M7 Priest, which put a 105mm howitzer on an M3 or M4 tank chassis. Only 100 were built at first, and 74 used in Normandy. And the M7 could go 25 miles per hour on roads and cross any land tanks could, and the crew could fire from the vehicle and even move while firing if needed. And the M12 gun rotor carriage mounted a 155mm gun on a modified M3 tank chassis. Only 100 were built at first, and 74 used in Normandy. And the M12 could destroy bunkers with direct fire, like during the Siegfried Line attacks in autumn 1944, where it could pierce 7 feet of reinforced concrete. And its mobility let these heavy guns reach targets fast that would take days for towed artillery, while German artillery stayed mostly horse-drawn. And Germany used about 2.75 million horses in World War II, with each infantry division needing about 5,300 horses for guns and supplies. And a German artillery battery usually needed 150 to 200 horses to move 4 to 6 guns, plus ammo and gear. And the horses needed constant care, food, and rest, with about 20 pounds of fodder a day. And getting this in combat zones was a big job, and horse-drawn guns could move at most 25 kilometers a day in good conditions, and in rain or mud, only 10 kilometers or less. And hitching horses to guns, moving them, and setting up at a new position took 2 to 3 hours in good conditions, and in combat with enemy fire or poor visibility, it could take much longer. The big difference between American motorized artillery that could move in 15 minutes and travel 50 kilometers in an hour, and German horse-drawn artillery that took hours to move and could only go short distances each day, was very important. And depending on horses caused more problems because horses were easy targets for shells, planes, and disease. And if a battery lost many horses, it could not move for days until replacements came. And horses needed stable places to rest and eat, and unlike trucks, which could just be parked, horses needed constant care. And units had to assign many men to look after horses, so fewer men were available to fight. And German attempts to mechanize artillery in 1943 and 1944 were too late and not enough to beat American mobility. And some units got half-tracks or captured vehicles, but most guns stayed horse-drawn to the end. And German armor and mechanized divisions had motorized or self-propelled artillery, but these were only a small part of the army, while most infantry and artillery relied on horses. And in December 1944, the new proximity fuse made American artillery even stronger, because it had a tiny radio that measured distance to the ground and exploded the shell at the right height, usually 15 to 20 meters, making every shell an air burst without tricky timing calculations. And it was developed in secret starting in 1940 and used in anti-aircraft and Pacific Island fights, but not allowed on the ground in Europe, because Pentagon officials feared Germans could capture fuses and copy the tech, which could hurt Allied bombers. But the German attack in the Ardennes in December 1944 changed that, because on December 16, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group used proximity fuse shells at Monschau without permission because the emergency needed it, and it worked perfectly and killed German infantry effectively. And then General Eisenhower formally asked to allow ground use on December 19, and on December 21, all restrictions were removed, and proximity fuse shells were sent quickly to the front. And they were devastating to troops in trenches and foxholes, because positions that protected soldiers from contact fuse shells did not stop airbursts, and the shells caused 3 to 4 times more casualties. and the psychological effect on Germans was severe, because their doctrine said entrenchments and cover would protect them, but soldiers who survived months of combat using proper field fortifications suddenly found those methods. American artillery made German defensive methods almost useless, because some German soldiers said they would not hide in trenches or cover.
Foxholes during bombardments, thinking they were just as likely to die there as standing up, and unit cohesion fell as soldiers lost faith in defenses. And the total effect of American artillery was crushing, because historians say about 70% of all ground combat casualties in World War II were caused by artillery and mortars, and this is true for all armies, not just Germans. And artillery caused more deaths than small arms, tanks, or planes. And American artillery was the best in the war, and the German army knew it, even while the war was still going on. And Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who commanded German forces in Normandy until he was injured in July 1944, wrote to Hitler that American artillery coordination was far better than German. And he said Allied air control plus strong artillery made German counterattacks very costly and usually fail. And Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, a top German commander, said after the war that American trucks helped Soviet artillery move fast on the Eastern Front, giving them mobility German horse-drawn guns could not match. And this showed even Soviet artillery, which was considered less advanced in fire control, gained big advantage from American mobility. And the American artillery system was not one big invention, but the result of careful development over 20 years with officers at Fort Sill studying World War I, finding problems, making solutions, testing them, and training thousands of artillery officers. And the system worked because every part was designed to work together, and it needed excellent maps with standard grid coordinates, and American forces had many maps down to platoon level. And it needed strong radios that worked even in hard conditions, and trained forward observers who could locate targets and call for fire. And observers were trained a lot and attached to infantry at company level. And it needed accurate weather data because fire is affected by wind, temperature, and air density, and American artillery had meteorological teams giving regular weather updates. And it needed survey teams to find exact gun positions, and every battalion had survey sections to make sure guns were set up correctly. The American artillery system needed detailed firing tables and graphical firing tables, and these were made in large numbers and sent to every fire direction center. And every part worked together, and if one part was missing, the system would get worse. But when everything worked, the system gave precise, coordinated firepower no other army could match. And German soldiers in foxholes learned to fear the Piper Cub engine overhead because they knew that meant death in about 3 minutes. And Americans did not make their artillery system because they were smarter or braver, but because they saw the problem, spent resources to fix it, and built institutions to train soldiers and maintain equipment to carry out the doctrine. And the German army had very good artillery officers who understood fire control as well as Americans. But Germany had limited resources after World War I because of the Versailles Treaty. And when rearming in the 1930s, they focused on tanks and air support. And artillery was important, but not the main focus. And Soviet artillery focused on mass and lots of fire, which worked for big Eastern Front battles where targets were huge and precision was less important. And British artillery focused on careful fire planning and preparation and was very effective and respected by Germans. But only Americans combined speed, precision, flexibility, and overwhelming firepower in one system, ready to respond fast to changing situations. And the Fire Direction Center made American artillery act like one weapon with hundreds of barrels, controlled by a single mind, able to fire huge amounts anywhere in range in minutes after spotting a target. And Major General Carlos Brewer, who helped make the early doctrine, retired in 1946 after commanding the 12th Armored Division in training, but could not lead it in combat because of age. And he asked to drop to colonel so he could serve as artillery officer in Europe, and worked on Corps artillery staffs in 1944 and 45, helping plan huge artillery concentrations supporting Allied attacks. And after the war, he went back to Kentucky, ran a small farm, and never sought fame and died in 1976 at 85. And Major General Orlando Ward, who made the Fire Direction Center, had a longer career and commanded the 1st Armored Division in North Africa, and later led the Field Artillery School during World War II, and stayed in the Army after the war, retiring as Lieutenant General, and wrote a lot about combined arms operations and artillery. And his papers are at the Army Heritage and Education Center in Pennsylvania. And neither Brewer nor Ward got wide public recognition for their work. No monuments were made, and no popular books told Brewer and Ward's stories. And official World War II artillery histories mostly credit the Field Artillery School and mention some individuals, but Brewer and Ward appear mainly in special military publications. Yet their work saved thousands of American and Allied lives by letting artillery stop enemy forces so well that infantry and tanks could move forward with fewer casualties. And their system killed tens of thousands of Axis soldiers who had no way to defend against precise, coordinated fire. And the Fire Direction Center idea spread through the American military and became standard NATO doctrine after the war. And the Soviets made their own version of centralized fire control, but it was less flexible than the American system. And modern artillery fire direction comes from the ideas developed at Fort Sill in the 1930s and improved in World War II. And digital computers now replace graphical firing tables, and GPS replaces survey methods. But the basic idea is the same, with centralized control, pre-computed data, fast coordination of many batteries, and flexible use of fire support. And the story of American artillery superiority in World War II is not about individual heroism, although artillerymen were brave. And it is not about technological miracles, although the proximity fuse and other innovations mattered. It is about careful institutional development, about doctrine written in peacetime by officers thinking about future wars, about training programs that drilled procedures until they were automatic, about logistics that supplied millions of shells to thousands of guns firing non-stop for months, about communication networks that kept artillery coordinated even in chaos, and about maps, surveys, weather data, and firing tables, all prepared so when combat started the system worked, and about thousands of officers, non-commissioned officers, and soldiers who learned their jobs and did them professionally under pressure. And the German army had good guns and skilled crews, but Germany had no system. And German artillery worked battery by battery with limited coordination and no central control able to mask corps-level fire on sudden targets. And when German artillery faced an enemy with a real integrated artillery system supported by the world's biggest industrial economy, German guns were simply overwhelmed. And the war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. And that morning, American artillery fired its last combat missions, stopping scattered German resistance in Czechoslovakia and Austria. And then the guns fell silent, and forward observers packed up their radios, and fire direction centers shut down their plotting boards. And the system that had stopped so many German attacks and helped the Allies win with fewer casualties stopped working. But it did not vanish. The doctrine survived. The training survived, and the institutional knowledge survived. And when American artillery went to war again in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Persian Gulf, and in Iraq, the system still worked. The weapons changed and technology improved, but the main idea stayed the same, with centralized fire direction, fast response, flexible coordination, and massed fires delivered precisely against any target in range. And that's how wars are won, not by big battles or individual heroism, though those matter, but by logistics, training, doctrine, and careful execution by officers in classrooms making procedures, technicians keeping equipment working, logistics moving supplies, and soldiers doing their jobs under pressure through thousands of small tasks that make military systems work. And American artillery in World War II worked because the system was carefully designed, fully tested, well-resourced, and professionally run. And German soldiers facing it learned there was no defense. They could dig deeper, move faster, hide better, but when the Piper Cub appeared overhead, artillery fire would arrive with mathematical precision. And that certainty, that inescapable mechanical efficiency of death from above, broke the Wehrmacht's ability to fight well in Western Europe. Not tanks, not air power, but artillery, the weapon Americans perfected through years of careful development, the weapon that gave no warning, left no escape, and showed that modern war is won by systems and institutions, not by single weapons or heroic acts.